The flight attendant's smile vanished as Julian Rhodes, airline CEO, watched the white businessman demand those disruptive minority children be removed from the spacious first-class cabin. The businessman froze when Julian approached. "Those kids you're complaining about? They're my family." The cabin fell silent. Julian's next decision would change everything. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more true stories about people who faced discrimination and stood up against it. What would you have done in Julian's position? Let's find out what happened next. Julian Rhodes clutched his leather portfolio as he strode through Miami International Airport's exclusive priority lane. At $42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built something substantial from nothing. His tailored steel gray suit and the subtle Coastline Airways pin on his lapel were the only outward signs of his success. 20 years ago, no one would have believed that the skinny black and Venezuelan kid from Little Havana would one day run his own airline. Growing up, air travel had seemed like something from another universe. "Mr. Rhodes, your family just checked in. They should be boarding in about $30 minutes," said Ms. Elena, the concierge manager, who had personally escorted him through security. Julian smiled. He hadn't seen his sister, Isabella Bella Rodriguez, and her 3 children in months. Between expanding Coastline Airways international routes and fighting for a crucial New York LaGuardia terminal contract, family time had become precious and rare. This vacation to Seattle was long overdue, his first real break in 3 years. Julian scrolled through old family photos. There was Bella at his company launch party 8 years ago, beaming with pride. This trip was about reconnecting with the people who mattered most. At the other end of the terminal, Bella Rodriguez held tightly to $7-year-old Miguel's hand while keeping an eye on Sofia. $10 and Javier $14 as they rolled their carry-on luggage through the bustling airport. "Remember, Tio Julian got us special tickets, so we need to be on our best behavior," she reminded them. "Mom, I know how to act." Javier rolled his eyes in typical teenage fashion. "The email said we get to board first because we're in first class." Sofia, the peacemaker, adjusted her glasses. "I've never flown first class before." Bella admitted she hadn't either. Julian had declared, "Coastline family flies, Coastline Airways first class or not at all." As a single mother working as a paralegal, Bella could never have afforded such luxury on her own. The family approached the gate where Flight 195 to Seattle was preparing for boarding. The gate agent's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you're in our Diamond Elite cabin. We'll be boarding you first." Meanwhile, rushing through the terminal, his phone pressed to his ear, Mr. Victor Hayes barked orders. At $58, Victor had built Hayes Logistics into one of the country's largest shipping firms. His silver hair was expensively cut, his Italian loafers perfectly shined, and his manner suggested a man accustomed to deference. "Tell the team I won't sign the merger papers unless they guarantee the executive structure remains streamlined," he snapped, checking his high-end timepiece impatiently. The first-class cabin of Flight 195 was Julian Rhodes's pride and joy. He had personally overseen its design, insisting on privacy screens, customizable lighting, and wide, plush seats. Ms. Clarissa Jones, the lead flight attendant, working first class on Coastline Airways, was the pinnacle of her $15-a-year career. Coastline Airways empowered its staff with clear protocols and a zero-tolerance policy for abusive behavior. "Welcome aboard," Clarissa greeted Bella and her children. "You're in seats $2 through $2D. As other first-class passengers began boarding, Bella noticed occasional curious glances. She felt a familiar discomfort. The subtle scrutiny often faced in predominantly white affluent spaces. The unspoken question, "Do you belong here?" Victor Hayes boarded last among the first-class passengers. His expression soured when he saw Bella's family. His seat, $3A, was directly behind Sofia and Miguel. Julian had slipped aboard during boarding and taken seat $5C, several rows behind his family, planning a mid-flight surprise. As he settled in, he observed the silver-haired man who seemed irritated by the presence of children. The scene triggered a memory Julian had buried long ago. Summer 1992. He was 10 years old. His mother, a cleaner, had taken him to the community pool of her affluent client. His joy lasted exactly 10 minutes before the pool manager pulled him out, explaining that only residents were allowed. The humiliation burned hotter than the Florida sun. Now, watching Victor Hayes' thinly veiled disdain, Julian felt that old anger stir. But he was no longer that powerless child. This was his airline. Still, he hesitated. Was it better to observe first? Or was that just the habitual caution Black and Latino professionals learned to employ to avoid being labeled oversensitive? As the economy passengers filed past, Julian noticed how Victor stiffened when Miguel laughed at something Sophia whispered. Victor checked his watch, sighed loudly, and pressed the call button. Clarissa appeared immediately. "Is there a problem with children in first class?" Victor asked, his voice pitched to Carrie. "I paid for peace and quiet. All our passengers are welcome in the cabins they've booked, sir. The children aren't being disruptive," Clarissa responded, her professional smile unwavering. "There must have been some mistake with their boarding passes." Victor leaned closer. "Perhaps they were upgraded due to the flight being oversold." "No, sir. The family booked first-class tickets." Julian watched this exchange silently, his jaw tightening. In first class, flight attendants offered pre-departure beverages. Victor sipped his drink, but his concentration kept breaking each time Sophia or Miguel spoke. "Mom, can I play my game?" Javier asked, pulling out his tablet. Victor cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse me," he called to Clarissa. "I have an important business call after takeoff. Will there be any way to control the noise level?" His eyes flicked meaningfully toward Bella's children. Bella stiffened, clearly overhearing, and whispered something to her children, who immediately became quieter. Julian observed how his sister instinctively made herself and her children smaller in response to Victor's complaints, the burden of accommodation always falling on them. He held back for now. Dr. Amelia Chen, an ethics professor seated across from Victor in 3B, looked up from her journal. "The children seem perfectly well behaved to me," she said pleasantly but firmly. "I've been on flights with adults who were far more disruptive." Victor gave her a dismissive glance. "I've been flying first class for $30 years, ma'am. Standards have clearly slipped. Or perhaps they've improved by becoming more inclusive," Amelia countered. Sophia turned around in her seat. "Mom," she whispered, "why is that man angry with us?" Javier removed one earphone. "It's because we're Black and we're Latino, isn't it?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "Some people make assumptions based on how we look," Bella finally said. "But that's their problem, not ours." As final preparations continued, Victor stopped Clarissa again. "Look," he said, gesturing toward Bella's family. "I understand everyone can buy whatever ticket they want, but there must be some policy about upgrading these people to Economy Plus instead. I'd even be willing to cover the cost difference from their current tickets. Sir, those passengers have purchased first-class tickets just as you have," Clarissa said. "I find it hard to believe they paid full price." Victor persisted. "Was it some kind of affirmative action upgrade program? Diversity initiative?" "Sir," Clarissa said firmly, "Coastline Airways does not discriminate against any passengers. Everyone in this cabin has equal right to be here." Victor waved his hand dismissively. "I just paid $8,000 for peace and quiet, not to listen to children who clearly aren't used to being in this environment." Voiceover. From his seat, Julian had heard enough. The coded language was unmistakable. These people, affirmative action upgrade. The implication that they couldn't legitimately afford first class without special assistance. Every professional of color recognized these dog whistles. Julian unfastened his seatbelt and stood up, straightening his suit jacket. The captain announced over the intercom, "Flight attendants, prepare for departure." Victor wasn't finished. He pressed the call button again insistently. "I want to speak to the purser or whoever's in charge. This is unacceptable." Julian stepped into the aisle and walked forward. As he approached Victor's seat, Clarissa recognized him immediately. "Mr. Rhodes," she said, her relief evident. "Is there a problem here, Ms. Jones?" Julian asked calmly. "Yes, there is," Victor interjected. "I've been trying to explain that I need a quiet environment and you believe those children are too loud," Julian finished for him. "They don't belong in first class," Victor stated flatly. "It's clear they've never been in this environment before. Probably some kind of promotional upgrade." "I see," Julian said. "And what makes you think they don't belong?" "Who exactly do you think you are?" Victor demanded, his face flushing. Julian extended his hand. "Julian Rhodes, founder and CEO of Coastline Airways." And those disruptive children you're complaining about? They're my family. The first-class cabin fell into a stunned silence. You're the CEO? Victor asked skeptically. This is indeed Mr. Rhodes, our founder and chief executive, Clarissa confirmed quietly. Well, Victor said, attempting to recover, I had no idea. You should have introduced yourself earlier. Why? Julian asked simply. Would it have changed how you spoke about those children? Victor flushed. My concern was never about, it had nothing to do with what? With anything inappropriate. I simply expect a certain atmosphere in first class. Professional, quiet, dignified. I designed this cabin myself, Mr. Hayes, Julian said. I designed this cabin to be inclusive and comfortable for all our first-class passengers. Families, business travelers, seniors, everyone who chooses to fly with us and can afford the ticket. I never said anything about race. Victor shifted uncomfortably. You people always make everything about race. You people? Dr. Amelia Chen echoed, raising an eyebrow. When you suggested my family had received affirmative action upgrades rather than believing they could afford first-class tickets, what exactly did you mean by that? Julian pressed. I'm a loyal customer with Diamond Elite status. I've flown over 1 million miles with this airline and this is how I'm treated? Do you know why I started my own airline, Mr. Hayes? Julian continued without waiting for an answer. 7 years ago I was flying first class to a meeting. The flight attendant asked me 3 times if I was in the right seat. Then a white passenger complained that I didn't look like I belonged there. I promised myself that day that I would create an airline where everyone who purchased a ticket would be treated with equal respect and dignity. I usually fly Delta or United, Victor said, changing tactics. Perhaps I'll return to them after this trip. That's certainly your prerogative, Julian agreed. If you find our standard of respect for all passengers difficult to meet, then perhaps another carrier would better suit your needs. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, Julian moved to sit next to his sister. Javier gave his uncle a subtle fist bump. No one is making you leave, Julian assured the children firmly. This is my airplane and you are my special guests. Julian's phone vibrated. Thomas Chen, Coastline Airlines' CFO, was on the line. Julian, we just got a call from Hayes Logistics. They're threatening to pull out of the LaGuardia Terminal East development deal. Something about their CEO being harassed on one of our flights. Are you involved in this? The Terminal East project was a $50 million investment to expand Coastline's presence at LaGuardia, creating a premium lounge and dedicated gates. Hayes Logistics was the primary construction developer and a major investor. Victor Hayes is on my flight right now, Julian confirmed. He was making racist comments about Bella and the kids. I confronted him. Thomas's sigh was audible. Julian, that deal represents 15% growth for next quarter. The board is counting on it. So I should let him disrespect my family to protect the bottom line? That's not what I'm saying, Thomas replied. But this is business. Sometimes we have to separate personal feelings from professional relationships. Julian had heard this advice countless times throughout his career. Swallow the microaggressions. Let the coded insults slide. Don't make white people uncomfortable. The unspoken price of success for a professional of color in America. I'll handle it, Julian said finally, ending the call with Thomas. When he looked up, Victor Hayes was standing in the aisle beside him, scotch in hand. We need to talk, Victor said, his voice low but intense. Now I understand why your name sounded familiar. Your company is partnering with mine on the Terminal East project. Julian gestured to the empty seat beside him. Have a seat, Mr. Hayes. Victor sat down, leaning in close. Let's cut to the chase. This little misunderstanding could have significant repercussions for both of us. Is that a threat? Julian asked calmly. It's business reality, Victor countered. My company is providing 30% of the financing for Terminal East. The board votes on final approval next week. Julian thought back to the palpable excitement in the room when he had pitched the $50 million Terminal East expansion. Now all of that was in jeopardy because he had dared to stand up to prejudice directed at his own family. So what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Hayes? Julian asked. I'm willing to forget this unfortunate incident. We all have bad days. I'll continue supporting the Terminal East deal, and you'll apologize for overreacting and causing a scene on your own aircraft. Julian studied the man before him. I didn't overreact. I defended my family against racist implications. Victor's expression hardened. I never mentioned race, not once. You're the one who brought race into this. It was the classic deflection. Deny the obvious racial subtext, then accuse the person of color of being hypersensitive. Mr. Hayes, when you suggested that Black and Latino children couldn't legitimately be in first class without some special program or upgrade, the racial component was implicit in your assumptions. From several rows ahead, Bella approached. Julian, is everything okay? Everything's fine, Bella. Mr. Hayes and I are just discussing business. Victor's demeanor changed instantly. Mrs. Rodriguez, I want to apologize if my comments caused any distress. I assure you it wasn't my intention. Bella regarded him coolly. My children have done nothing wrong, Mr. Hayes. They deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of who their uncle is. After Bella returned to her seat, Victor leaned in again. Look, Carter, let's be practical. You've made your point. I've apologized. Now let's move past this before it affects both our companies. Julian's phone buzzed with another text from Thomas. Hayes' VP just called. They're putting the deal on hold pending review. What's happening up there? Then you're choosing personal pride over the welfare of your company? Victor demanded. What about your employees, your shareholders? Are you willing to sacrifice their interests for this principle? Julian thought of Javier watching this interaction, learning how a Black and Latino man should respond to racism. I built my company on principles. Mr. Hayes, respect and dignity for everyone who flies with us is foundational, not optional. Victor stood abruptly. Then you've made your choice. I'll be instructing my board to withdraw from the Terminal East deal effective immediately. As Victor returned to his seat, Julian's phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Coastline Airways stock dips 13% on rumors of development deal collapse. In that moment, looking at the subtle nod of understanding from Javier, Julian knew that whatever the financial cost, he had made the right decision. Some principles were worth fighting for, even at great expense. The flight had been in the air for 40 minutes when Victor Hayes made his next move. After several hushed phone conversations, he flagged down Clarissa. I need to be moved to a different seat, he demanded. I refuse to sit near these people any longer. Sir, the first-class cabin is fully booked, Clarissa replied. Then move me to economy, Victor insisted loudly. And I want it noted that I'm being forced to relocate due to harassment from your CEO. The accusation was a complete inversion of reality, the kind of gaslighting familiar to those who confront prejudice. Mr. Hayes, Julian said evenly, standing up, no one is harassing you. You made discriminatory comments about my family. I addressed them, and now you're attempting to paint yourself as the victim. This is slander, and my attorneys will have a field day with it. Victor pulled out his phone. I'm recording everything from this point forward. Recording other passengers without consent violates our privacy policy, Clarissa informed him. I'm being treated like a criminal when I've done nothing wrong. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I'm personal friends with 3 members of the FAA Regulatory Board. The threat was clear. Victor was escalating to regulatory pressure. Julian made a quick decision. Clarissa, please inform the captain that we have a disruptive passenger in first class. Ask if security should meet the aircraft upon arrival in Seattle. Victor's eyes widened in disbelief. You're having me removed for what? Complaining about noise? For creating a disturbance, making discriminatory comments, attempting to record passengers without consent, and now threatening regulatory action against the airline, Julian replied steadily. You can't do this. I'm a paying customer. Our terms of service clearly state that discriminatory behavior toward staff or other passengers is grounds for removal, Julian explained. Dr. Amelia Chen spoke up. Mr. Rhodes, your stance makes me more likely to choose your airline in the future, not less. Several other passengers nodded in agreement. Victor noticed the shift in mood. Look, this has gotten out of hand. I'm willing to issue a formal apology if we can put this behind us. An apology would be appropriate, Julian regarded him skeptically, but I suspect it's motivated more by self-preservation than genuine remorse. Clarissa returned, troubled. Mr. Rhodes, the captain has requested that you come to the cockpit. Your board chair is requesting an emergency video conference. In the cockpit, Captain Laura Reynolds looked concerned. Marcus, what's your assessment of the situation? Whitfield is disruptive but not dangerous, Julian said. The video conference was brief and tense. Ms. Barbara Thornton, the board chair, was grave. Julian, what the hell is happening up there? Hayes Logistics just issued a statement that they're terminating all business relationships with Coastline Airways due to unprofessional conduct by leadership. Our stock is in free fall. Julian explained the situation. The board is convening an emergency session. This incident could trigger a confidence vote, Julian. The implication was clear. His position as CEO was in jeopardy. I won't apologize for defending my family against racism, Barbara. Some principles aren't negotiable. When Julian returned to the cabin, the situation had deteriorated further. Victor was standing in the aisle recording with his phone despite repeated requests to stop. Bella was shielding Miguel, who had begun crying, while Javier stood protectively in front of his mother and siblings. He was recording the children. "Tío Julián," Javier reported. "Why does he hate us?" The $7-year-old sobbed, his words cutting through the tension. The innocent question hit Julian like a physical blow. This was the real cost of prejudice, the psychological damage inflicted on children. The protective uncle could no longer tolerate seeing his family hurt. "That's enough," Julian said with quiet authority. "Clarissa, please inform the captain that Mr. Hayes will be removed upon landing, and notify Seattle International that we'll need security at the gate." Victor lowered his phone, finally realizing the seriousness of the situation. "You're actually going through with this? Do you have any idea what this will cost you?" "I do," Julian replied. "And it's worth it." The businessman's composure cracked. "You people always stick together, don't you? Play the victim card when it suits you." The mask had finally dropped, revealing the naked prejudice beneath. "Mr. Hayes," Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you've just demonstrated exactly why this action is necessary." Richard jabbed a finger toward Julian. "This isn't over. I'll own this airline when my lawyers are done with you. Discrimination, harassment, public humiliation. You'll face charges for all of it." Julian turned to the rest of the first-class passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption to your flight. I founded Coastline Airlines with a commitment that every passenger would be treated with dignity and respect." Julian's phone buzzed with another text from Barbara. "Board vote split. Holding emergency press conference upon your landing. Stock down 8% and falling. As Flight 195 began its initial descent into Seattle, the atmosphere remained charged." "Are they going to take your airplane away, Tío Julian?" Miguel asked. "No one can take my airplane away," Julian assured him. "What matters is that we stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." "I'm proud of you, Tío Julian," Javier spoke up. The simple statement from his teenage nephew affected Julian more deeply than any investor praise. Just before landing, Julian's phone lit up with a message. "Hayes on board of Seattle Expansion Committee. Votes next week on our new terminal proposal." The business stakes had just doubled. Hayes had influence over the planned Seattle expansion as well. As the aircraft doors prepared to open, Victor stood up. "Last chance, Rhodes. Call off the security escort. Issue a public apology, and I might be persuaded to maintain our business relationship. Do you realize I sit on the board that will vote on your SeaTac terminal proposal next week?" Victor hissed. "One word from me and 7 years of planning goes down the drain. Mister, why don't you like us?" Sophia suddenly spoke up. "You don't even know us." Victor momentarily lost his balance. "It's not that I don't like you, little girl. This is adult business. You wouldn't understand." "I understand that you were mean to us because we're black and Latino," Sophia replied. "My mom says that's called prejudice." "You people are all the same," Victor snapped, his mask slipping completely. "Play the race card when it suits you, then cry discrimination when you're called out." "What did you just say?" Julian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. At that moment, the aircraft door opened and 2 airport security officers stepped into the cabin. Behind them stood Vanessa Rodriguez, the company's COO. In the jetway, Vanessa didn't mince words. "The board is in emergency session. Our stock is down $12 per $1. Investors are panicking. And you think I should back down?" Julian stated. "There are $500 employees depending on those Seattle expansion jobs, Julian. Families with mortgages and college tuitions. What would you do in my position, Vanessa?" "I don't know. I haven't lived your experience. But as CEO, I have to advocate for the company's stability." Julian made his decision. "Tell the board I'll issue a statement immediately after we deplane. But I'm not backing down on removing Hayes. Some lines can't be crossed." When Julian re-entered the cabin, Victor was being escorted toward the exit, still protesting. As he passed Julian, he hissed, "You've just destroyed your company." "I hope it was worth it." Julian watched him go. To his surprise, most of the passengers broke into spontaneous applause. Even some who had seemed uncomfortable during the confrontation joined in, recognizing the courage it took to stand firm. Dr. Amelia Chen approached as passengers began to deplane. "Mr. Rhodes, I'm an ethics professor at the university, and I specialize in social justice law. What happened today was textbook discrimination, and I'd be happy to provide a statement supporting your actions. Thank you." "Dr. Chen, I may take you up on that offer." Outside the aircraft, the media was waiting. Cameras flashed as Julian emerged with his family. Barbara Thornton stood at a makeshift podium, clearly preparing to do damage control. But before Julian could join her, a surprising development unfolded. A group of passengers from the flight led by Dr. Chen approached the media. "We witnessed everything," Amelia announced, "and we want to publicly support CEO Julian Rhodes's decision to remove a passenger who was making overtly racist and prejudiced comments toward a minority family." One by one, passengers stepped forward to corroborate the account. An elderly white couple, a young South Asian American student, a middle-aged black woman, a diverse cross-section united in their condemnation of Victor's behavior. As they spoke, Julian noticed something remarkable on his phone. Social media was exploding, not with criticism, but with support. Hashtags like Stand with Rhodes and Fly with Dignity were trending. Customer testimonials poured in, and most surprisingly, Julian's inbox was filling with messages from investors and business partners, not pulling away, but doubling down on their support. One venture capital firm offered to replace Hayes' investment in the Terminal East project. Barbara approached, her expression a mixture of amazement and relief. "The board vote just came in. Unanimous support for your actions, Julian, and our stock has started to recover already." "What about the Seattle Terminal project?" Julian asked. "3 other members of the approval committee have already reached out to distance themselves from Hayes," Barbara replied. "They're suggesting the vote be expedited to show there's no ill will toward Coastline Airways. The potential business disaster was transforming into a defining moment for the company's brand and values. The next 48 hours unfolded in a whirlwind. Julian huddled with his executive team in the exclusive Coastline Airways lounge at SeaTac. "The video has over 7 million views already," reported Melanie Wong, the social media director. "Comments are running roughly $80% supportive of our position." Vanessa pulled up an analytics dashboard. "Bookings initially dropped right after the news broke, but they've rebounded and are now running $15% above normal." "People are booking flights because of this?" Julian raised an eyebrow. "The hashtag is driving significant traffic to our booking site. Many customers are explicitly stating they're choosing us because of your stand against racism." The controversy had created new opportunities even as it closed others. Not everyone was celebrating. Thomas Chen, the CFO, looked troubled. "Hayes Logistics has officially terminated our contract for Terminal East, and they're demanding return of their initial investment." "Options?" Julian asked. "There's a third option," Barbara interjected. "Blackstone Group and 2 minority-owned investment firms have already submitted term sheets. They're offering better terms than Hayes." "What about the Seattle expansion?" Julian asked, thinking of the $1,500 jobs. Vanessa smiled. 3 board members from the approval committee called personally to express support. They fast-tracked our proposal and separated it entirely from Hayes' influence. "We need to be careful not to appear opportunistic," Julian cautioned. "This can't look like we're exploiting a racial incident for marketing purposes." As the meeting continued, Julian's phone lit up with a text from Bella. "You need to see this. Turn on CNN." Victor Hayes' face filled the screen, holding an impromptu press conference. "This is a clear case of reverse discrimination," he was saying. "A mask of injured dignity. I raised legitimate concerns about disruptive behavior, and CEO Julian Rhodes chose to make it about race because the passengers in question happened to be a minority family." Behind him, a small, conspicuously diverse group of Hayes Logistics employees stood, a transparent attempt to use them as racial shields. "This is the oldest play in the book," Julian observed. Victor then announced, "I've filed a formal complaint with the FAA and initiated a $50 million lawsuit for defamation emotional distress, and damage to my professional reputation. He's bluffing, said Michael Rivera, the chief counsel. But litigation is expensive and distracting. It's a pressure tactic. Julian turned to Barbara. We don't settle. Not on this. We fight it all the way, whatever it costs. By evening, Julian finally made it to the hotel where Bella and the children were staying. Uncle Julian, you're trending on Twitter, Javier announced. People are calling you a hero. I'm no hero, Javier. I just did what was right. There are some really racist comments on these posts, Javier said quietly. Let me see that, Julian said gently, taking the phone. The comments included vile racial slurs alongside messages of solidarity. I want you to remember something important, Julian told his nephew. Those hateful comments tell you nothing about your worth and everything about the brokenness of the people writing them. Don't let them into your head. Later that night, Julian and Bella sat on the balcony. Do you regret it? Bella asked softly. I regret that it happened at all, Julian replied. But no, I don't regret my response. What message would it send to Javier, Sofia, and Miguel if I had prioritized business relationships over their dignity? You sound like abuelo. Bella smiled sadly. Their father had been a civil rights activist in the 1960s, teaching them that dignity wasn't negotiable. Julian's phone rang. It was Clarissa Jones, the flight attendant. Mr. Rhodes, I wanted you to know that the entire cabin crew from today's flight has submitted statements supporting your actions. And it's not just our flight. Crew members throughout the airline are sending messages of support. Many of us have experienced similar situations and felt powerless. Your example today has meant a lot to us. Julian was deeply moved. He had started something bigger than just one confrontation. The next morning, the Coastline Airways boardroom buzzed with tense energy. Our stock initially dropped 15% but has recovered about half of that loss, Thomas reported. Bookings remain above average, especially in our core demographic. Whitfield has retained Sullivan and Gray, one of the top litigation firms in the country, Michael confirmed. Litigation is about resources, publicity, and pressure points, and Hayes has resources to burn. Vanessa interjected. Our security team intercepted communications suggesting Hayes plans to make this personal. They're digging into your past, Julian. Anything they can use to paint you as having a racial agenda. So what are our options? Julian asked. Minimize, counterattack, or elevate? Barbara summarized the PR options. Julian listened, then stated, This isn't just happening to the company, it's happening to my family. Just then, Dr. Amelia Chen entered the boardroom. After what I witnessed on that flight, I couldn't stay silent. I've prepared a formal statement and I've spoken with 5 other passengers willing to go on record. There's more, Amelia continued. 3 former employees of Hayes Logistics have filed discrimination complaints with the EEOC in the past 5 years. All were settled confidentially, but this is part of a pattern of behavior. Julian's phone buzzed. The crew members from Flight 195 are at reception. We'd like to speak with you before Hayes' press conference. Julian met with the crew. Darius, a young black flight attendant, stepped forward. Sir, that's exactly why we need to be there. This isn't just about one flight. It's about whether people like us can do our jobs with dignity. Julian returned to the boardroom. We're going with the third option, he announced. We'll use this as a platform to strengthen our commitment to dignity and respect for all passengers and employees. He instructed Thomas to prepare for the worst-case financial scenario and Michael to fight the lawsuit with no settlements. Vanessa was tasked with drafting a comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative. Julian's phone rang. It was Bella. Javier wants to come to the press conference. I asked him the same thing, Bella said. You know what he said? Tio Julian stood up for us. Now I want to stand with him. Julian agreed, with strict conditions. An hour later, Julian stood backstage with Bella and Javier. Victor Hayes was at the podium, delivering his carefully crafted narrative. Coastline Airways has demonstrated a troubling pattern of selective enforcement, Victor was saying, a mask of injured dignity. I was treated like a criminal for raising legitimate concerns about cabin disturbances. He continued the performance, leveraging his status and his employees of color as props. Mr. Hayes, multiple witnesses contradict your account. How do you respond to their statements that you used racially charged language? A reporter called out. In today's hypersensitive climate, Any criticism of a minority person is automatically labeled as racist. Regardless of intent or context, Victor condescended. "He's lying," Javier whispered, indignation clear in his voice. When Victor concluded his remarks and exited through a side door, avoiding confrontation, it was Coastline Airways' turn. Julian took a deep breath as he was introduced, stepping onto the stage with quiet confidence. Bella and Javier stood slightly behind him, a visual reminder of the real human beings at the center of the controversy. "Good morning. I am Julian Rhodes, and the family who was disrespected on Flight 195, my sister, Bella Rodriguez, and my nephews and niece, Javier Sofia and Miguel, are standing behind me. What happened on our flight was not a misunderstanding or a debate about cabin decorum. It was a clear, unmistakable act of prejudice. A passenger, Mr. Victor Hayes, repeatedly questioned my family's right to be in first class simply because of their race and appearance. And he used coded language that we, as professionals of color, recognize immediately." Julian pauses, letting the weight of the statement settle. "I founded Coastline Airways to create a space where dignity is non-negotiable. I built this company not just for profit, but because of a promise I made years ago, to ensure that no passenger ever feels unwelcome on one of my planes. Mr. Hayes has filed a $50 million lawsuit and threatened our business. I want to be clear, we will not settle. We will not apologize. We will fight this lawsuit to the end, because to do otherwise would be to compromise the very soul of this airline. Today, we are announcing the Ascend Together Anti-Discrimination Initiative. This includes mandatory, continuous anti-bias training for all employees, a direct channel for reporting discrimination to an independent oversight board, and a new policy that explicitly states any passenger found to be engaging in discriminatory harassment will be immediately removed and banned from flying Coastline Airways. We are choosing to elevate this conversation. We believe that in 2025, standing for human dignity is not just the right thing to do. It is good business. We will replace any business lost with partners who share our values. We have multiple, uninvolved third-party witnesses, including Dr. Amelia Chen, a professor of ethics in our flight crew, who will confirm the events. Mr. Hayes accused me of abusing my power. I answer that by saying, I used my power to protect my family, to protect my employees, and to protect the promise of this company. That is the definition of leadership at Coastline Airways. Thank you." Julian steps back, his face resolute. The room is silent for a moment before the reporters erupt in shouts. Julian places a hand on Javier's shoulder. In the days and weeks that followed, the confrontation became a global rallying cry. Coastline's stock soared, fueled by public goodwill and the new value-aligned investors, effectively replacing Hayes' capital. The lawsuit dragged on, but with the overwhelming witness testimony and Dr. Chen's evidence of Hayes' prior discriminatory pattern, the case was ultimately dismissed with prejudice. Victor Hayes' public reputation was shattered. His own company's stock fell sharply, forcing him to resign amidst internal pressure. Julian Rhodes not only kept his airline but strengthened its identity, proving that courage, integrity, and inclusion were assets, not liabilities. "Good morning," Julian began, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of his office. "My name is Julian Rhodes. I'm the founder and CEO of Coastline Airways. But today I'm also speaking as an uncle whose family was subjected to discriminatory treatment while flying on my own airline." He recounted the events truthfully, describing Victor's escalating complaints, the coded language, and the explicit statements made when Victor believed his business leverage would shield him from consequences. Coastline Airways was founded on a simple principle, Julian explained. Everyone who purchases a ticket deserves to be treated with equal dignity and respect. That principle isn't negotiable even when upholding it comes at a business cost. He then introduced the Ascend Together Anti-Discrimination Initiative and the Scholarship Program. These steps aren't a reaction to one incident, Julian emphasized. They're an affirmation of values that have guided this company from its inception. The only difference is that now these values have been tested in a very public way. When it came time for questions, Julian handled them with the same straightforward dignity. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal asked, "Mr. Rhodes, was this confrontation worth potentially jeopardizing major business deals and partnerships?" "There are some principles that transcend business calculations," Julian replied. "The right of my family, and by extension all families, to travel without being subjected to prejudice is one of those principles. If standing firm on that value costs us certain partnerships, then those weren't partnerships we should have pursued in the first place, another journalist pressed. Some business leaders are suggesting you should have handled this privately. Racism thrives in privacy, Julian replied simply. When we address it behind closed doors, we reinforce the idea that it's too shameful or complicated to confront openly. I believe in transparency. The atmosphere in the room was transforming. Javier stepped forward when a reporter asked how the confrontation had affected the family. With poise that belied his $14 years, he spoke directly to the cameras. Javier, it wasn't the first time people looked at us like we didn't belong somewhere, but it was the first time someone with power stood up and said clearly that we did belong. That matters. His simple statement cut through the corporate and legal complexities to the human heart of the matter. Afterward, Dr. Amelia Chen approached with unexpected news. Mr. Rhodes, I've just received word that 3 former Hayes Logistics employees have reached out, willing to speak publicly about discrimination they experienced under Victor Hayes's leadership. Julian considered the development. Thank you, Amelia. Sometimes principles need concrete examples to be fully understood. Clarissa Wilson and the flight crew approached. What you did on that flight meant everything to us, Clarissa said. For years we've had to smile through racist comments, all because the customer is always right. You showed us that dignity isn't negotiable. Barbara approached with a smile. The board just called. They're $100% behind you. They've approved an additional budget for the anti-discrimination initiatives. 3 months after the confrontation, Julian Rhodes stood before the Transportation Committee of the United States Congress. The hearing room was packed. Julian's family sat proudly in the front row. Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, Julian began. What happened on our flight wasn't exceptional. What was exceptional was that it was documented, witnessed, and addressed directly. He detailed the broader context of discrimination in travel and the implementation of Coastline's Dignity First policy. No passenger's status, wealth, or connections exempt them from treating others with basic respect. A conservative committee member leaned forward. Mr. Rhodes, aren't you concerned that this policy could be misinterpreted or abused? Could legitimate customer complaints be mischaracterized as discrimination? Congressman, Julian countered calmly, our policy distinguishes between subjective service issues and clear instances of bias. We've found that with proper training, our staff can readily identify the difference. Outside the Capitol, Julian commented on the settlement reached with Victor Hayes. The lawsuit had been settled favorably for Coastline, including mandatory sensitivity training for Victor himself. Julian didn't mention his private meeting with Victor 3 days before the settlement. Victor, his public reputation in tatters, had admitted, I wouldn't have assumed they didn't belong in first class. I would have given them the benefit of the doubt that I would give to a white family. It was an acknowledgement of the differential treatment that constituted the core of the problem. Julian was now met by Clarissa Wilson and the newly formed Coastline Airways Dignity team. The training program launches company-wide next week, Clarissa reported proudly. What had begun as internal policy was spreading. 3 other major carriers had announced similar initiatives. The business implications for Coastline Airways had stabilized. The Terminal East project was proceeding, and the Seattle expansion was approved ahead of schedule. Victor Hayes had resigned as CEO of Hayes Logistics. That evening, back at home, Julian sat with Bella and the children. My teacher used our story in class today, Javier mentioned casually. She talked about how standing up to discrimination still matters today. Sophia looked up from her book. A girl at school asked me if I was scared when that man was yelling on the plane. I told her I wasn't scared because Tio Julian wouldn't let anything bad happen to us. Miguel, who had processed the experience by visiting the cockpit, now wanted to be a pilot. You changed things, Julian. Bella squeezed his hand. They saw what it looks like when someone refuses to accept the status quo. Later that night, Julian received an email from a young black flight attendant at a competing airline. Yesterday, a first-class passenger made racist comments about a black family in my cabin. In the past, I would have smiled. Instead, I calmly informed him that discriminatory language wouldn't be tolerated. My supervisor backed me up completely. Your stand created ripples that are changing things for all of us. Julian looked around his diverse first-class cabin on his flight the next morning. A white passenger was warmly greeting a black family. "First time in first class?" the passenger asked kindly. "Yes," the mother replied. "Well, you're in for a treat," the passenger said. Coastline Airways has the best service in the industry. The slow, necessary work of bending the moral arc toward justice was underway. Julian knew with certainty no one had taken his airplane away. Instead, they had helped build something better. What would you have done in Julian's position? Would you have risked your business to stand up for what's right? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on this powerful story. If you found this story moving or thought-provoking, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more true stories of courage and justice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing up for dignity matters even when, especially when, it comes at a cost. Remember, our choices today create the world we'll live in tomorrow.